what's going on? This is Jay from SonyAlphaLab.com, and in this video tutorial I'm going to show you how to shoot HDR photography using the Sony Nex-7. And it's incredibly easy. There's a couple different ways you can do it. The first way I'm going to show you is how you can use Auto HDR with the Sony Nex-7. It works pretty good. Let me show you how to do that. First thing you got to do is you just have to make sure you're in JPEG mode. So you're going to need to change your image quality. I usually shoot RAW, so you have to make sure you select Fine right here, or you know, one of the other JPEG modes. But you can't be shooting RAW when using this feature. So that's that. Then you can just click back. Then you can navigate over here to brightness and color, where all those cool settings are. And then right here, Dynamic Range Optimizer, Auto HDR. You can select that. And then notice on the bottom here you have an option button. You can select that, and then if you turn the wheel here, the nav wheel, you can adjust how many stops you're going to use. So this scene is very high, so I'm just going to put it on 6. I'm going to leave it there, and then I'm just going to click the center button, and that's it. It's ready to go. So now, basically, when I hold the shutter down, it's going to focus and then fire off 3 shots, and it's going to create an HDR and put it right to the memory card for me. It's going to do all the processing and everything. Very cool. So let me show you what it looks like. I don't think it's going to be enough. Yeah, it's blinking right now because all that information is black. It's letting you know that it's clipped, but you could see on the histogram that it still has a lot of information that wouldn't have otherwise been captured. Here's the other image. This is the non-HDR, and this is the HDR. You can kind of see a little bit. Alright, so that's how you can do Auto HDR. Now this scene I purposely chose because one, it's simple. It's right on my kitchen table looking out the door. But two, it's extreme dynamic range, and I knew the Auto HDR would not be enough. So, first thing I'm going to do is go back to my image quality and set it up for RAW, because that's how I like to shoot. RAW mode. I like to process my images myself in Lightroom. So that's that. Whoops, let me go back to the menu. And I just want to show you something quick. I'm going to go back to brightness and color. Notice how the Dynamic Range Optimizer / Auto HDR automatically switched back to Dynamic Range Optimizer. See that? Because RAW is not supported. So normally you'd have to go back and switch, but the camera knows and it automatically turned that feature off. So it kind of saves you a step there. Pretty cool. But anyway, so now we're back in normal aperture priority mode. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to raise my f-stop up a little bit to like f4 or so. I'm actually using the Carl Zeiss 24mm f1.8. Pretty cool lens. Works pretty good so far. Very sharp, and it's a good focal range for this tutorial as well. So this is what I'm going to show you how to do. The scene hasn't changed, but what we're going to do is use our exposure comp. So just select your menu, go to your shoot mode, and make sure you're in aperture priority mode, which is the A. All right. And then set your aperture to something that you like. I have mine at f4 for this. This is just a tutorial. Normally you'd probably want it somewhere around f8, depending on what effect you're going for. But for this tutorial, I'm just using f4 to keep my shutter speeds a little high. I could also raise the ISO, but you really don't want to do that when doing HDR. You want to shoot at the lowest ISO as possible. Alright, and you want to use a tripod, so this way the shutter speed really doesn't matter. A self-timer and or remote trigger is highly recommended as well to get as little camera shake as possible. But in any event, let me show you what we got here. Alright, if you hold down and take a picture, that's our center exposure. And you can see now, looking at the histogram, whoops, let me hit play. This is the histogram here, and these are the color channels, red, green, and blue. And the camera combines those 3 channels to create color, just like a television. So you can actually see which channels are clipping. The red channel is clipping, the green channel is clipping, and the blue channel. So we're blowing out every single channel. Alright, in both highlights, which is on the right, and in the shadows, which is on the left. So I'm going to go back, and I'm going to use my exposure compensation, which is the right nav wheel. You can actually see it right here on the menu. It says EV and AV. So let's raise this up as high as we can go. Alright, that's +5. And we'll take a picture. I really should have this camera on a tripod. I apologize, I don't. I left it in my car, so I have it resting on something, so normally it wouldn't move. I apologize about that. But anyway, check this out. I'm going to hit play, and now look at my histogram. You can see all the information is mashed over to the right. So that tells you that all the shadow information I have. See that? None of the shadows are clipped. Now, that's what the exposure comp's set to. +5. Now I'm going to drag it to the left here until my outside scene looks pretty good. Right around there looks pretty good. -3. And there you have it. So now, if I hit the play button, I'll show you these in Lightroom too. I'm just going to show it to you quick on the camera here. That's the interior. That's the center exposure, right? And that's the outside shot. So we have interior, exterior, and there's an Auto HDR in there somewhere. Alright, yeah, here's the interior shot. I'm actually going to take one more. Instead of +3, I'm just going to do +2. Okay, just so it's still clipped, but now we have enough information for the whole scene. Let me show you one other thing real quick. There is a bracketing method. In order to get to that, you just have to go to the shoot mode option, which is right here. It's the left button on the camera, and if you scroll down, there's an option right here. See this bracket? You can select that and change it to 0.7 or 0.3, and that will automatically fire off 3 shots with a 0.7 or a 0.3 EV difference. So you'll get a -0.7, a 0, and a +0.7 EV shot. So it's a cool feature, but it's not enough to capture all the dynamic range in this scene. So it's not really going to work too good for us. So I'm just going to go back to single shooting mode. Alright, I just wanted to show you that quick. Now, I'm going to go to menu, and then I'm going to go to manual mode. Alright, there's manual. Now we're in manual mode, so there is no exposure comp, okay? We have the shutter speed and the aperture and the ISO. Those are the only things we have to manipulate the exposure. So what we're not going to want to change though is the aperture. The aperture you always want to keep the same when doing HDR because you don't want to be blending different depths of field and things like that. So the aperture stays the same, the ISO is going to stay the same, so the only thing we're going to change is the shutter speed. So that's the left navigation wheel. I'm just going to scroll it and notice how my exposure is changing, see? So I can take a shot here for the outside, 1/1000. Alright, and I can scroll the other way until I get a little brighter, somewhere around there. Alright, 1/100. And basically what I'm doing is I'm just taking multiple exposures at different brightnesses or different, EV values, you could say. There we go. Go a little bit brighter. And notice how I'm just changing the shutter speed. I'm just making it longer to allow more light to come in. So I'll change it from 1/6 to 1/5. 1/5 of a second. Let's try that. Alright, there we go. So now we have, if I hit the play button, you can change how this looks by hitting this display button over here up on the top of the toggle wheel. So you can cycle through different display modes. Alright, so I'm just going to go to the big one quick. There's 1, 2, 3, 4. See that? So I got 1, 2, 3, 4 images. And I'll show you those in Lightroom, and then we can combine them and create an HDR final product. It's a pretty cool scene. I'll zoom in there a little bit. We'll raise this guy up. Very cool. That's 200mm. Here's how you can adjust the exposure comp by using the right top nav on the Sony Nex-7. You can just move the exposure comp to the right and the left. See that? And bring it down. So you can do that when not only when you're recording video, you can do that when you're shooting just regular photographs as well, and you're not limited to the -2 and +2. It goes all the way to -5 and +5 when you're taking pictures. When you're in video mode, the exposure compensation only goes to -2 and +2. So that's good to know. But like I said, it's a great way to shoot HDR and using exposure compensation. So I just wanted to talk about that real quick while we're looking at this scene, because it's such a high dynamic range scene that you really have to shoot HDR in order to capture all the dynamic range. And we're up in Lightroom right now, and I just wanted to show you some of those HDR images. Here's one that I actually took the time to edit. I wish I had some more time. I definitely would love to edit more pictures. But anyway, let me show you some of the other ones. Alright, here's the images we took on the kitchen table a minute ago. This was the Auto HDR, and as I said, there wasn't enough information. 6 EVs wasn't quite enough to capture all the shadow information, but it did a decent job considering. Now this is just a regular exposure for just the outside, and as you can see by the histogram on the top right, the shadow information is clipping and the highlight information, there's extra, so we have all the highlight info, which is good. And then we're just moving up in brightness here and EV value. Here's a bright one, and here's one where we have all the shadow information. So those are our 4 exposures, and we can actually hold them all down. Let's hit the toolbar here, and we can look at all 4 at once. Here's the 4 exposures, and we can combine these in a HDR software. You know, there's all different kinds of software. You can use Photoshop, you can use Photomatics, you can use the Nix software. I have tutorials on all that stuff on my other website if you guys are interested. I'll put some links to it. But anyway, that's pretty much all there is to it as far as you know, getting the multiple exposures. And then once you get into Lightroom, you just select them and you can create an HDR. Very easy. So let me show you some of the other ones. Let's see here. The bridge picture. Oh, here. This is a normal exposure from the bridge, right? So obviously the outside is going to be blown out, and the inside, the shadows are going to be clipped. Now here's an Auto HDR, and it did a pretty good job. I mean, that's a regular exposure, and that's an Auto HDR. Now it's definitely not perfect. Don't get me wrong. But it did a pretty good job, is what I'm trying to tell you. I mean, that's not bad. So let me show you some other ones here. Alright, now here's a regular exposure. So you can see inside the bridge is completely black. And here's the Auto HDR. Now you can see, you know, some of the shadows here are purple and stuff like that. You know, these images are going to need a little bit of post-processing to really make them look their best. But it's a very nice alternative to having to do Photomatics and all that. I must say, it's so much faster, and you know, depending on the situation, you can get pretty good results. As you can see, this one's pretty sharp. I mean, it's a little over processed because the Sony tends to over process a bit with the noise reduction and sharpening. Oh, this is the one that I edited. Let me show you the exposures I used for this one. I used this exposure, this one, and this one. So I used those 4. And then the final product is this, fully edited. Looks pretty cool. I used that fisheye, the Rokina fisheye for that, and the Nex-7. And here's another one. Now this image didn't really come out too good, but you know, it's not bad. I was trying to get sample photos with some water and stuff. So here's the Auto HDR, and as you can see, it looks pretty much identical. It just opened up the shadows, and it also toned down the highlights, so it almost like added like fill light. If you look at it before and after, and notice up here in the sky in particular, see that before and after, and that's Auto HDR. Alright, here's an HDR, that's an Auto HDR. This is just a standard exposure, and if you look underneath the trench digger here, the excavator. Now, notice underneath the track there, now look at this shot. See that? All that shadow information opened up. Now again, you know, you're going to need to bring the blacks a little bit back in to edit this picture to make it look its best, but it helps to open up those shadows sometimes. And here's another Auto HDR. This one looks pretty good. And here's just a regular exposure, so you could see how dark it is down low. And the Auto HDR looks much better as far as that goes. Now there's a couple other shots. Oh yeah. Oh, check this out. This was a flag that was blowing, and I figured I'd try an Auto HDR because sometimes it makes a pretty cool effect. And this is a pretty cool effect. I mean, you know, it's not accurate or anything, but you know, sometimes you can have fun with it and get a cool effect. So I just wanted to show you that. Sometimes that's a little, you know, something to do. This was over at my parents' house, and the other day we went over there to hang out and have some dinner. And I put the fisheye on the floor, and outside was extremely bright, as you can see, and inside was really dark in comparison. So the dynamic range was a lot. So I put it on Auto HDR, maximum, EV of 6, and fired away. And this is the after. And this is totally unedited. I didn't do anything to it. So if I added a little more fill light, you know, and stuff like that, and add a little more saturation, I could really make this look pretty good. And you know, that's right off the camera. So this was one of the better results of the Auto HDR, in my opinion. Here's the standard exposure looking in the kitchen, and here's the Auto HDR, again, right off the camera. I did not touch this at all. And that's really good, in my opinion. See, here's a couple more fisheye shots. That's a standard exposure, and you can see over here it's pretty bright. And here's an Auto HDR. Another standard exposure. And notice up here under the roof, see that? All that shadow information just came in. Worked really good on this image too. And here's one more I took out of the car window on the way home. And this was a standard exposure. And this was the Auto HDR. Notice how it combined multiple exposures and it got the streaky lights. See that? How it combined the streaky lights with the regular exposure lights? There's like the one truck here, and then the next exposure got the streak because it was a longer exposure. So whenever you take an Auto HDR, you always get the standard JPEG as well as the Auto HDR. It's pretty cool. It always gives you two, you know, the regular exposure and the Auto HDR. I guess in case, you know, so you don't like it, so you have something to work with, you know. But anyway, it does a cool effect when you add moving subjects like that flag, and here, for example, with the car, you know, taillights and headlights, a pretty cool effect. And not too bad for handheld shooting out the car window, you know. Check this out. I mean, it's pretty sharp, you know, not bad. It could be, you know, don't get me wrong, could be sharper, could be better. But for handheld out the car window, that's not bad. And as you could see, the one exposure was pretty long. That's pretty much it with the HDR. And I hope you guys got something out of this. And as far as the HDR processing goes, like I said, I have a ton of tutorials on that using Photomatix, Photoshop, HDR Effects Pro. So if you guys are interested in learning how to use those programs, I'll give you some links, and you can watch those tutorials if you want. But this one was pretty much just showing you how to use the Nex-7 and what the Nex-7 can do, and it's quite impressive, I must say. I'm very happy with the results, and if you're an HDR shooter, you know, I think you'd appreciate the results of this camera as well. Cool. So as you can see, there's 3 different ways. You can use Auto HDR, you can use aperture priority mode and just manipulate the exposure compensation to get your different exposures, or you can go into manual mode and manipulate the shutter speed to get your different exposures. I hope you guys got something out of this, and I will catch up with you on SonyAlphaLab.com. And don't forget, just ask some questions if you have any in the comments below, and I will do my best to answer them. Alrighty, take care.